Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everyone to the session. So this is the second of the embedded finance panel. With the first embedded finance panel with Paulo and Hugh, we were discussing the evolution of embedded finance from early 2000s to now. Business models, walking through a couple of use cases that are implemented, experience and perspective working with regulators, innovation, regulation challenges, and future. Right. So we dealt with some of the strategic aspects of the previous panel and we'll focus on some of the tech aspects in this one. So with me, I have two industry experts and veterans, Tyler and Varun. Warm welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Good evening, everyone.
Likewise. Good evening, everyone.
Yeah. So Tyler, let me introduce both of these gentlemen to you. So Tyler Pichach is a distinguished professional with a proven track record of excellence, currently serving as an executive director of Worldwide FSI Business Strategy at Microsoft. With over 3 years of dedicated service in this key role, Tyler has made significant contributions to Microsoft global strategy in the financial service sector. Tyler is recognized for his strategic acumen and innovative thinking. In his role, he plays a crucial part in shaping Microsoft's approach to serving the unique needs of the financial service industry, ensuring that the cutting-edge technology solutions are aligned with industry demands. His deep expertise, combined with a keen understanding of both technology and finance, has led to the development of pioneering strategies and solutions that empower financial institutions to thrive in a rapidly evolving landscape. And Varun Sridhar, he's CEO at Paytm Money. Varun currently leads the Paytm Money, the biggest digital wealth management platform in India. He is responsible for driving strategy and leading the wealth management business for Paytm Money. Varun Sridhar was serving as CEO of Finchel India, an Oppo Group company, which is a part of Chinese mobile electronics company, for the last year and a half, where he helped launch a mobile fintech platform, the Realme Pesa. He has rich experience in the digital sector for over 2 decades. Varun has also worked with Josh Bank, BNP Paribas, Citibank, and Value Partners. Varun has also helped in the acquisition of Share Khan by BNP Paribas. And I'm your host, Pradesh, and I'm an Associate Director, Business Analyst at FIS. I work in the payments area and worked in all aspects of payments business for the past 24 years. And our group is responsible for keeping the FIS payments products and applications and our clients compliant with the payment networks. I'm also part of the innovation task force at FIS that oversees programs like these. And I'm very passionate about innovation myself. So welcome again, Tyler and Varun. Tyler, let me start with you. You drive a lot of business strategy at the financial service industry at Microsoft. Every bank, every fintech, every startup has an embedded finance strategy. Now we know that every strategy is not going to work, right? Now, some are better than others. Obviously, the strategy needs to take into account the customer experience, technology, profitability as some of the key considerations. So in your experience, what are some of the business growth strategies that you've seen working in the embedded finance space that helps an enterprise, a fintech, a startup build a successful outcome for the customers and for themselves?
Yeah, you talked about a lot of different personas there, be it the financial institution, be it the end consumer. That end consumer could be a retail consumer, could be a business consumer as well. And of course, the fintechs that play in between. And so when we're thinking about embedded finance, we look at each of those personas and try to understand what their business strategy should be, what their go-to-market goals should be as well. And if we start, for example, with the banks, you mentioned that, banks have embedded finance strategies, but I would say that most banks we speak to are at different timelines as to where they are, how they've evolved with that strategy. And so on one side, you've got banks that have built capabilities to extend, for example, payment capabilities into fintech applications. And they've done that in a way where they've built an API management hub, if you will, where those APIs can be exposed and used in a very controlled, and I would say somewhat limited way. In that regard, the bank thinks of embedded finance really as like tools to be able to have developers leverage their products. Those, I would say, are sort of early day thinking where they aren't really pushing, if you will, those services into applications. Rather, they're just sitting there waiting for others to kind of build into them. And I think it's a great place to start, but it's really not where we're seeing banks really get to the outcome. Where what they're trying to do is grow their revenue, right? Payments is a great place to start, and lending and other services as well. But even in the payment side, where there's lots of revenue, but it's somewhat confined. And so banks are typically thinking they do want to get out to a place where they can, extend their services into areas they would not normally participate in to grow that book. And so I think that those banks that are further ahead of that strategy aren't just, saying, hey, if I built it, please come use it. They're actually being progressive in saying, okay, I built it, now I want to push it into other areas, into other applications, business applications, consumer applications. And so then we start thinking about the other side of it. Who are the consumers of those, and what do they want? Right. And so if I'm a retail consumer, the idea, of course, of hidden finance, obviously it's the Uber example that we always like to use, where, the payment just happens completely in the background, and it's a fully embedded experience. And so I think consumers are getting to a place where that's more of an expectation and how they do the flow. And if it's not, and there's, manual processes where I have to, add my card or whatever my payment type happens to be, and it's all manual, like consumers are, we're seeing them to say, like, that's not an experience that they want. In fact, it actually can sometimes create a lot of a drop off, if you will, where the consumer doesn't even bother to finish the transaction because of that friction. And all they actually have to do is type in a few fields, but even consumers don't want to do that anymore, right? Like, they're coming to a place where they just expect it. That said, they also expect it with security, right? And there is a piece to say, if they have to do a couple extra things to, prevent the risk of fraud, as an example, they're willing to do that. But by and large, the embedded experiences become an expectation on the consumer side. And then you've got another type of consumer we talked about as well, which is the business consumer. So example, I'm part of our CFO team at a manufacturing company, as an example. And I work in my ERP, and every time I go to make a payment or do something around the payment space, I have to log into my bank to do things. I have to get outside of my ERP, the thing that I'm working to, and that's fraught with risk. I have to manually copy and paste things. It takes a lot longer. I've got to do manual reconciliation, all of those pieces. And so you've got another area where that business, it's unlike the consumer retail side where they expect it already. On the business side, they don't necessarily expect it, but they've just got a headache of trying to manipulate all these different tools to do their day-to-day jobs. And so I think you've got, two different needs, if you will. One is that expected experience, and the other is, I'd love to, on the business side, it'd be great if I could have an embedded experience, but they don't always get it. So now we know kind of two sides, right? The ones using it, and then the ones providing it. And in the middle is the fintechs. And I think understanding both sides and the goals of each is really important for fintechs to really start to play and say, okay, hold on a second. How do I get in the middle of this and enable the banks or enable the insurers to provide the embedded experience? And then how do I do it in a way that, really removes the friction where it exists on the retail consumer side, or can add to the business experience? And so I think, that sort of sets up, the environment that we're in, and all over the world. Again, different perspective. The banks are at different places, and in APAC, it may be a little bit different, but it depends on the country in APAC too. Again, wide variety of states. But I think that, this idea for, if I'm a financial institution, the idea of having to integrate. So I'm on the productive side, right? Like, I'm the one who says, I really see this as the business model. I'm going to go drive out new revenue channels. For me to have to then connect into each business application or retail consumer application, there are thousands and thousands of potential business applications. If you think about, like, just in the APAC community, well, let alone the world, right? And now you have reach to be able to do that, by the way. So having to go individually into each of those, huge challenge, right? If we think about just on the business side alone, as an example, just as a bank saying, I'm going to integrate into, the top 10, 15 different ERPs in the world or in that region, even that's a headache, because it's not just about, if I go direct integrations, I have to I've set up an operating model where when that business application makes a change, I have to have a team that makes a change as well. And how am I tracking the revenue? How am I tracking the business goals that I've done? It's really difficult. So as a fintech, in the middle of that, thinking about how can I create something that helps the banks have one connection, think of a pull from their APIs into multiple different business applications or multiple consumer applications, I think is something that really should be a focus. And that again gets to the bank's opportunity of how do I drive revenue in a proactive way? If I'm at the early stage, it becomes a fast pass for me to do it, that the ones that are already proactive are already thinking about. And then on the consumer, the business side, it helps them achieve their goals in a much natural way. So hopefully that sets up, how we think at Microsoft as a cloud provider with tons of business applications, billions of customers, how we are thinking about it at scale around the world, and certainly in APAC.
Sure, Tyler, thanks. I think you set up that nice context where you mentioned, you have fintechs on one side, one on the middle, and you have the end consumers on one side, the banks on the other side. And so how do you bridge that gap between the consumer's expectation and what the banks can provide and what the fintechs can provide? And so that's really a nice way of looking at the situation and see where we can create value for all of the players in the ecosystem, right? So that's a great example. So from a practical applications and use case perspective, like we have seen a lot of use cases, embedded payments, insurance, lending, credit, investment, and so on. There are very common use cases that you mentioned, like the Uber example, the travel insurance embedded, the purchase of airline ticket example, BNPL, and so on, right? So what are some of the use cases that excites you that have potential to change the way consumer experience a particular product? Like how can startups collaborate with fintechs to build those kind of journeys?
Is that for me or?
Yeah. You can start.
Sure. So look, I mean, there are tons of examples in the retail space, but I think that's where the market is getting a little more saturated. There's still going to be more that'll come out. What we're really focused on at Microsoft right now is in the business space. And so, selfishly for us, we have, a couple of the largest business applications in the world. One of those is Microsoft Dynamics from an ERP perspective. And so we are looking at how to solve those problems that I talked about earlier, where the business user has to navigate across multiple different applications, fraught with risk, how to do that in a very, very simple way where they can, do all of their financial services, whether it's payments, whether it's lending, whether it's insurance, all within the application that they're in. And so that's an area we're very, very focused on at scale. We think about not just one bank connections, but multi-bank connectivity, all the way from small business up to large corporates. Again, you've got multiple different personas all across that map. The other thing that we're really excited about too is how do we think about that within other business applications like Microsoft Excel? And I know we're going to talk about generative AI example later on, but how do we solve that understanding of how to think about leveraging the data that we're going to get from embedded finance, all of those different elements. And I think on the business side, that creates a super exciting new area or potential for how do we monetize data, how do banks monetize data, how do fintechs monetize data, all for the benefit of the end consumer, whether it's on the business side or on the retail side. So, certainly we're excited about that. And then the third thing that we're excited about Microsoft, again, is and not just our own products, but because we are, the largest cloud provider in the world, how do we extend all of the capabilities of thinking about, API connectivity, data, security, all of those components so that developers can leverage that into new applications that don't exist today? How are they going to take all of that at scale around the world? Those are three areas that we're super excited about right now when it comes to embedded finance.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Tel. That makes sense. So, Varun, let me come to you. We've seen a lot of ideas that look promising, but could not be built into a viable model from a financial standpoint. Right now, Paytm Money has done, Paytm has done pioneering work in payments and with a variety of use cases, and with Paytm Money, there are options to build, trading experiences on top of your ecosystem, algo trading platforms. Obviously, you play a lot into embedded investment use cases. Can you perhaps share one or two ideas to implementation journeys, which is about having the right product design, bringing to the market successfully that offers great customer experience to the users of that product?
Yeah, thank you, Pradesh. I'll do that, and good evening, everyone. And I'll just maybe do a segue from where Tyler left it. And I used to be a banker for a long part of my life, and I'm glad I'm not. Right, and I think because it's fintech is not in the center. I think there are two extremes of the pole. Right, on one side, I used to be a very proud BNP Paribas employee. I still am. I think fantastic bank, did a great job, but somewhere. I felt 2016, 2017, at least the technology wave slapped me very hard, right? So I'm a banker, not an engineer, but somewhere I realized that, hey, you could solve problems differently. You could bring consumers much better solutions. You could really solve a need using technology at 100x the pace, at 1/10 the cost. And then the question is, what gets remaining is either your profit or you pass it on to the consumer, right? And till I really went on to do my own first startup, and then Paytm Money happened to me. I think the journey for me has been really opposite ends of the extreme, right? Because on one side, you talk about very large systems, and even if monolithic systems have become microservices and it's got a bit better, it's gone on cloud, blah, blah, blah. I'm still shocked to see banks, large ones, in the best of places talking about batch processing. Right. And you come to somebody like us, and I'm a startup, right? All said and done, we are 3.5 years old, but we recently did about 250 million transactions, right? And when somebody like me does 250 million transactions, and we do it at, we aim to do everything at a 99.9999% accuracy, right? So for me, everything around it is very, very important, right? And we are a pure digital setup, investing about 80% of our money on product and tech, right? And when you think about 80% of your investments going into product and tech, I don't have a physical model, right? So while I do an investment platform, and I'll start with that and go a bit deeper and then come back to, explain, Pradesh, how at least we do it, or how at least we think about it, right? So for example, I have at least one mutual fund customer in 99% of all PIN codes in India, right? Just think about this. Okay, it's a large country. It's very well spread out. And we've never marketed ourselves. You'll never see Paytm Money marketing itself, right? And we are maybe India's top 5 wealth managers. Now, when we had to solve that problem, what was the problem we were solving? There were banks which were very traditional, had obviously all these large systems built out, but the fundamental problem was either they were branch-centric or RM-centric, and now trying to become omni-channel, and then trying to solve digital footprint, right? I think it's a wrong way to solve a problem. When at least we joined, we said, hey, that's wrong, right? Why? Because the customer also doesn't want to be at the center anymore. And I think that's the biggest difference I realized at FinTech. Customer actually wants to live life. Who wants to manage money? It's boring, right? The world of finance is ultra boring. Like, who wants to manage money? I don't, you don't. But at the end of the day, financial services is like oxygen. It's like electricity. Like, have you ever thought of it? Are you managing the electricity of your home or the water of your home? No. You switch on the tap, it comes and you're done. And that's for me finance, right? And that's what I call embedded finance. So I think if you want to think about yourself like that, and which is what we started doing at Paytm Money, then we said, hey, customer is not at the center. Customer's time is at the center, right? And I call that in my own language, return on time invested. There's an Indian bread called roti, right? Everybody eats it. I hope all of you, have had some sort of roti in some form. But roti for me is the return on time invested by a consumer, right? Because every time he or she, and Tyler spoke about entering card numbers, I think those days are gone, right? The minute, I literally look at my digital funnel real time. I have a war room. It tells me for every extra character on a input box, what's the waterfall drop off, right? And so the way to think about this whole journey, therefore, is reverse, right? So you start with saying, hey, what's the problem I'm solving? Is it worth it? And once you at least understood what it is, can we actually bring technology in to solve something? And I separate technology as technology and as data, what I would call data footprints, if you may. Because there are two ways to solve a problem, I think, in the modern world. Either you use technology to solve it because you can automate, you can scale, or you can use data. So typically what I'm a fan of Figma, right? I just love it. I think it allows everybody to go fast. It allows people to see things faster. So typically I always tell, be very simple. There's no point having strategic conversations. I think it's completely, you can have a strategic conversation at a board level, but normally the guy, in a meeting room, the one with the highest salary decides everything, which is normally wrong because that person is the farthest away from the consumer's time. Okay, so actually the pyramid has to be inversed on decision making. And if you want to inverse it, the best way is to be very practical, quickly get down. So if we, for example, and I'll take an example of equity trading. So we do algo trading because you mentioned it, I'll pick it up. Right? Everybody does a lot of trading, and therefore trading speeds, how fast can you do a trade is important. Right? So when we put out our API network, the first thing I did was I said, hey, can you quickly do Figma? Call 100 traders, send it to them on WhatsApp, get them on board, put them on a Zoom call or put them on some sort of a call. And, we'll check with them. They will tell us in the next 48 hours if they like or don't like, give them a screenshot, ask them to, mark it on WhatsApp because it's the stupidest thing to do, but people do it really fast. My whole product from conceptualization to end was done in a week, right? And this is a massive product under which today, we process about 30-40% of our trades, right? And we are India's 9th biggest broker. So when you think about it, 1 week, everything was done. Now, the next question is how do you solve for what I would call scale, which is where I think fintechs have an advantage not having legacy, and legacy gets built over time. I don't think banks are bad because they are the way they are. I think smart people everywhere, right? It's a question of what's your legacy and how far are you able to leave it behind. Fintechs don't have, or startups don't have a legacy, so they're able to get a fresh approach. So you sit down and you code upfront, right? So we, for example, one of the things I've realized is if you are going into a vendor system approach, because sometimes you're forced to, creating your own middlewares becomes very, very critical so that you can imagine in future to unplug A, unplug B, or do A, B parallel, right? And I think that's one golden rule, because sometimes you're just forced out of compliance, out of regulation to be in an ecosystem kind of infrastructure, right? As compared to being on your own. So the way we look at it then is to say, hey, how do you very quickly build for scale? For example, at Paytm, just to give you a sense, we do 1 million orders a day. So we've scaled our technology to up to 10 million orders. Now, the fun part is not the 10 million a day. The fun part is between 9:15 a.m. and 9:15.30 seconds, so 30 seconds in the morning, about 30% of the trades go through. So now you have to reverse and calculate the TPS that you're talking about, which is immensely, immensely tough from a technology perspective to deliver. But the fact is, I think the financial services world is driven by peaks and not by the averages. And I think that's the big difference, which I think embedded finance, which partnering with people, which allowing your technology to be open source, allowing other people to help you solve your problems is a big leap of faith. Because, in the technology world, people say IP is everything. But I think we've come to the conclusion that ideas have no value, implementation does, right? And for implementation, you really need to be hands-on and you need to be open. You can't do everything yourself, right? So somewhere I think, for me on the technology side, that's part A. And part B, and I'll stop with that and transition back to you, Pradesh, is for me on the data sciences side, I think there's a whole, the digital consumer is leaving so many footprints, right? He's telling us, earlier what used to happen, you sit with somebody and, I'm looking at Tyler, I'm looking at you and I'm saying, hey, what is his emotion? What's her emotion? Now, emotion has become maths because an app doesn't know what's your emotion, right? I don't know. There's no way for me to know, are you happy? Are you excited? And so on. So understanding and converting data to emotions is very, very important in your product journey, right? And I think that's the other focus for us. How do you do that? Because if you're not able to do that, eventually you'll build a cold app. So imagine a salesperson who doesn't smile, who doesn't laugh, who doesn't talk. Imagine a service person like that. It's not a good relationship, right? At the end, we are humans. And I think these are the two pillars. We'll talk about it later, Pradesh, but back to you.
Sure. Yeah, that's very interesting, right? You mentioned the correctness of the platform, right? When you're dealing with money, it's not about 99.99%, right? It has to be kind of close to 100%, because if you'll notice this money is missing, right? So that's an immediate thing which people will notice. nobody wants to. You said nobody wants to manage money, but people want to make sure it's there, right? So when it comes to the money question, and then I think earlier days, we had when we had to transfer money from banking to the investment broker, it used to take like 2 to 3 days to kind of the money to appear in this platform, right? And that's kind of an opportunity missed, and that's something that the new age and now everybody does it, right? Like that's become a common. If you don't have that facility, then nobody's going to use the platform, right? And I like the way you put it, understanding the data and converting it to emotions, right? Because how do you measure engagement, right? So you need to be able to have some kind of measure. How do you think? How do you understand what the customer is thinking? Is he happy using the app? Not happy? What are the pain points? How can we solve them, right? So that's very interesting. So Varun, India as a country, right? There are a lot of opportunities in the investment space now. Most of the country's savings are still in FD, gold, real estate. When we look at the mutual fund penetration, the insurance penetration, the stock market investments, the NPS, the percentage of people invested in these products are pretty small, right? So there's a large runway for growth. Now, knowing this part is easy, right? The difficult part is how to offer those services to seamlessly embed investment services into customer journeys. Right now, you need to have strategic partnerships, partnership models. You need to target the client segments because all products do not work for everyone. So there needs to be an element of defining the customer segments, defining those digital journeys, have the right technology play, define the right cost structure, and be profitable, right? That's the end goal. What's your vision about embedding those investment journeys for end consumers, and how do you see startups contributing to that journey? Like this is a B2C play, but there is also a bigger B2B play in this, with the large institutions like AMCs, the stockbroking platforms, the corporates, and so on. So what's the vision there? So two parts: the B2C and B2B vision, and how startups can help.
Sure. Prajesh, thank you. Just a small thing. I'm being a listed company. I'm not going to give you too much of forward-looking stuff because
sure. Yeah, sure. And understood. Yeah.
Just to be, sorry to be impolite, but just to be on that. But yeah, you're bang on, Pradesh. I think India at max, there are only 30 million Indians doing what we call a monthly SIP, which is how do you save every month? It's a very regular thing that Indians do, but you save every month. But between saving and investing, I think there's a whole new difference, right? It's a whole new world. Everybody can save, but then with the current world inflation and with the Americans trying to sort out their economy, the world is in trouble. And as far as that inflation is concerned, as long as, anybody in a non-American economy keeps money in a bank, I think they're only losing money, right? And so therefore, saving is not equal to investing. Now, I think thanks to COVID, thanks to the American economy, at least the Indians have started to understand that. Right, because savings is not equal to investing, I think is a very powerful change that happened right after COVID to India. And that's been a beautiful, beautiful bump up, I think, and a big change and a big revolution that's happening. So just to give you some numbers, about 400 million Indians do digital payments, but only about 30 million of them do a monthly mutual fund investment. Only about 20 million of them actually invest in stocks, right? So, but you will have at least 100 million plus people doing fixed deposits, doing other things, right? Paytm has a digital gold product where you can buy a gold, a digital gold product for 1 rupee, which is very, very small, up to $150,000 at one click, right? And we have about 40 million customers inside that product, right? And so, as you think about it, I think that journey India has to make, right? And that, in my mind, revolution started. I can literally bet my life on it, and that's what I'm betting my life on, that by 2030, India would easily have crossed about 200 to 50 million people who have actively entered capital markets. And I think majority of the journey, 80% of it, will be driven by startups, fintechs, young Indian entrepreneurs who will own up what I would call the revolutionizing that sector. And I'll give you just a few examples of what I see changing there, right? And I think there's a lot to learn from the way Americans have done it. There's a lot to learn from the way that China has done it, or advanced economies like Singapore have done it, and so on, right? There's a bunch of examples across the globe. I think we just need to Indianize it. Our technology is far ahead. I think we're 10 years ahead of most people. So that allows us to leapfrog. But the missing element for me is three things. A missing element is education, right? Because a lot of people don't understand. Unfortunately, we produce the best brains, the best engineers, architects, doctors, whatever you name it, I think we have it. But we don't teach them how to invest $10 every month. So the problem is our schooling system, and I was very glad to see, in our 14-year, I was in a school about 10 days back, 14-year-olds are better than what I was when I was 35, I guess, on how to invest. Okay. Now they're not allowed legally, but I think even that will change, right? Because they're somehow using their father's account, mother's account or something. So I think there's this huge journey India is going to make with 10 years out. All these 12-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-olds will be, at 18, telling their parents, hey, I don't want to do this bank stuff. I want to put it in capital markets. Let me do it myself. I know what to do. And thanks to education in India becoming technology driven, I was literally surprised. I'll give you an example. I saw a 16-year-old come to me with a Python code saying, sir, I've connected to your APIs. My bot is running. It does about 60 transactions a day in 3 minutes. I'm having a problem because your ticker is giving me ticks every 5 seconds. Is it your problem or is it the exchange's problem? So this is a question I get asked in the school. Okay.
Wow.
Literally I had to go down and I had to hug the guy and I say, hey, why don't you join my company and take my job? Because, so that's the future. Okay. So I'm very positive the future is bright. Okay. But I think we need to solve at a country level, at a startup level, education. And I think that's getting done. And we'll talk about that. I think the second thing we need to solve is simplicity. So for example, we very recently launched a government bonds platform. Right. And Indians, 99.99% of Indians don't have a government bond because we don't know how to buy it. There's no way you can buy it. So the way it comes to us is actually the banks buy it and then they give it to us in the form of fixed deposits. Right. So most of us don't know how to buy a government bond or a corporate bond. So we took that problem and we worked with the regulators, with the exchanges, with everybody, like you said, all the parties. It took me 2 years. And we launched a platform where you can buy a central government of India bond, 39-year bond, for 100 rupees. So the bond value is 100 rupees, which is $1.02 for a fee of a cent. Okay. Now, just think about it. One click, you're able to buy now 39-year fixed rate, 7.5% coupon. And when I went with my Figma design, my consumers were looking at me saying, hey, I don't understand any of the language you mentioned. Which language are you talking in? I said, oh, this doesn't work. They don't understand finance. So we flipped the product around. And we went back and said, you put 100 rupees in central government. It is the safest thing you can do, right? That's the safest thing in India you can do, right? Sovereign debt is there. So we told them this is the safest. If you put 100, you get 7 rupees every year and your interest rate is 7. And all of a sudden, the whole thing worked. Everybody was clicking and enjoying it. But to execute that simplicity, it's at least 100 APIs behind 2 years of engineering work. But for me, it's one screen. It's literally one screen. Right. And we've done about $40-50 million there in about 3 months, no marketing, no nothing. It's just gone on its own. And consumers are talking about it and, challenging us, saying, oh, no, I don't like this. I don't understand this. So I think that is happening on bonds. But the way I look at the future is I'm betting, I think, the mutual fund product, because it's my strong belief that people eventually want money to work harder than they do. I think people already work very hard in a country like India to save and create a corpus of wealth. Right. And our social system, we are a large populous country developing. We can't retire today. If I retire today, nobody's going to take care of me. There's no EU unemployment allowance coming to me. Right. None of that exists. Right. So then so I think we are creating our own wealth. So there's this huge hard work that we do to create that wealth. So that's anyway happening. I think now the question is, how do you optimize that so that the person can work slightly lesser and the money can work slightly more? That's the game. It's a game of a few percentage points here and there. And I believe that someone there, and I hope it's us, and I'm sure there are, last count, there were 1,200 wealth tech startups in India, Pradesh. 3 years before, that number was less than 20. Now, look, I'm willing to bet myself that the 3,000, 4,000 will change to 50,000. Because the number of use cases, small ones that will come up in this space, because India is becoming richer. And I think, there's this whole wealth getting created. It has to be managed. So what's going to eventually happen, and I think that's the dream product I would like to build, is, let's take the example of Tyler. He comes in and he hits a button and says, hey, look, can you give me a low risk, decent interest, decent money, and I really don't want to know. I want to be protected. I want to know my rights. I don't want to be cheated. I don't want fraud. Like Tyler had mentioned about security, I think that's ultra important, right? I think we need to secure the consumer, because if you somehow, and that's where I think embedded finance, working with older banks, working with regulators helps, because they allow you to be conservative, and I think that's fantastic, right? So I think somewhere we need to build this ecosystem. But Pradesh, just as a closing comment, I would bet on a technology-led wealth management platform and products and an ecosystem getting created. Like UPI has happened for digital payments in India, which has leapfrogged us by 10 years. I think that the same thing will happen in digital wealth management, and that's happening. And 6-7 years from today, I think you will see the outcome of that, right? But yeah, that's how I see it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of startups in this space, wealth management space, that are listening to your talk. And we have talked, as part of this program, we have talked to a number of startups which are in this space, right? So, and you mentioned that, right? I mean, the numbers are only going to increase because of the democratization of a lot of things that's happening in this sector, right? So, and you mentioned important point, the security, the securing the customer, right? That's super important in this space, right? Security, but there is also the background, the fraud, the AML, all that stuff that's going on. And then to me, the highlight was the education, right? So when we grew up, there is no financial education, and you learn a lot about history, geography, mathematics, and all that stuff, but nobody taught us, how do you build wealth, right? There is no course on wealth management or what are the financial products available, and this is something that we have to learn ourselves, and nobody likes to kind of take a course on how to invest in mutual funds, or how to generate wealth, right? That's not something that everybody likes to do. So that's an interesting perspective. Thanks. So Tyler, coming back to you, as they say, data is the new gold. And tech companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple, all those companies know how to use data. Now, data also exists in banks. For example, decades worth data, or in terms of payments, the banking channels, and so on. But for a long time, they have not channeled to any useful purpose until now, right? So how do banks choose the right partners in the embedded finance journey? There are technology and infrastructure providers, partners like the cloud platforms, some of the AI ML capabilities that they bring in, software platforms that helps embed the journeys and help with insights. There are different vendors that power those platforms and so on, right? So how do you craft a strategy around this? And do you see a space for startups to collaborate with banks and other parties in the space?
Yeah, absolutely. So go back to what Varun mentioned earlier, which I thought was great, about thinking about things as an ecosystem. And certainly we think that embedded finance is really a part of a much, much broader ecosystem. And so maybe starting with the cloud providers as an example, and the things that they can provide to support an ecosystem. And so, we certainly think about things like security as a foundational component for any sort of financial transaction happening across multiple different parties. That security extends not just to the applications, but of course, all of the data that runs across. And there's different, views on the data itself, right? So when we talk about security, we're not just talking about making sure bad actors can't access that data. Or those applications, but we also think about security from, whose data is it? And things like entitlements, especially if we start thinking about things on the business space, from the small business all the way up to corporates. There's a lot of issues around data governance, thinking about generative AI. How do large language models get trained in the future, as an example, and what does that mean? And then, of course, thinking about how we can think about things and leverage the data across multiple different parties and how they use those. So as an example, some of the work that we're doing right now is around what we call confidential computing. We've got some great use cases where banks are looking to monetize data by effectively saying, hey, look, if I'm a financial institution, what do I know about a customer? I probably know, where they buy things. I know how much they spend. I know, life events about a customer, when they have kids, when they get a new job, when they get married, when they retire, but I don't necessarily know what they're buying, right? As a merchant have SKU level information. They know exactly what they're buying. But what does a merchant not have? A merchant doesn't have all the horizontal information that the banks have. And so as an example, the ability to bring those data sets together in a very secure way where you can't actually see the actual raw data itself, but you can get insights across those. That kind of hyper-personalization, I think, is a new frontier that banks, and it's not just banks, by the way, it's healthcare, it's manufacturing, it's all sorts of industries are going to come together to do some really interesting things. And then, layering over top of that, the financial implications of selling insurance, of selling, new capital markets products, selling, whether it's just traditional savings accounts, even all of those things become a lot more accessible when it's personalized at a individual layer versus a group layer. And so I think as we think about consumers really doing more with embedded finance, getting more into, like, Varun, your comments around how do we open up the markets to do real investing as an example, having a personalized experience to get there, fully backed by the trust and the security of that ecosystem, of the banks, of the technology companies, the cloud companies, all of that coming together into an individual place, I think is really exciting. And then I know we have a few minutes left. So I have to just put another stamp on, of course, thinking about what that means for generative AI in the future. So as an example, Microsoft, of course, is heavily investing into this world of copilots. We've announced and we'll be launching soon our Windows Copilot, to think of this idea as a trusted bot effectively that guides you through your entire journey when you're working in Windows. And so as an example, extending that as a conversation into finance, about investing, about things that are happening, you need to get a new loan because you've been looking at buying a new car as an example, or buying a new house, or whatever that happens to be, but making that part of your regular experience as you just happen to be on your PC or on your phone, for example, not even thinking about being in a business application, just your day-to-day usage. Like, Varun, I love what you said about, this is the time, right? Like it's just regular part of your time. All of the other stuff is behind the scenes. This is where generative AI, I think, is going to play a really enormous part, because of the ability for AI to be able to start providing those recommendations and doing that as part of your regular life, and embedding financial experience across those. You might not even know that it's a financial transaction that's actually happening anymore. You just don't think of it that way. And so, like, our hope is that in the future, we keep using Uber as example, as the primary example, but I think that's going to shift, because Uber itself is an app. And really remove the app, bifurcate that, and just talk about your regular day-to-day experiences and how you do things, and embedding experiences, financial experiences and others across that in a really seamless way. Data is going to enable that. And I think as cloud providers, we are on the cusp of doing that and creating that ecosystem to allow that to happen. But it's going to be a multi-party thing across so many different players, but in a simple way that's going to really make it happen over the next few years.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it. And you mentioned the merchants, the bank example, right? So we had, just reminds me of, we have WorldPay merchants and then FIS banking partners. And so we had an initiative to kind of see how we can bring those kind of thing together, right? So that's very interesting that you mentioned that. And then, the generative AI, right? So right now, people are kind of scared to use the technology to consumers, to customers, right? Because you have to put some guardrails around, data privacy, copyright, all that stuff. So I think it is an evolving space. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves and power those customer journeys, right? We are kind of out of time. Unfortunately, I had so many questions to ask, but we are kind of out of time. So sorry about that, but we do have to end now. I've thought of, also talking about the challenges and the opportunities ahead, but I guess, we have just hardly 1 minute, and I think it'll take more than 1 minute to kind of answer that. So we'll end here. So I'd like to thank you, Tyler and Varun, and such an enriching discussions. Unfortunately, we kind of ran out of time, but really appreciate taking the time to share your knowledge. We talked about a variety of topics, starting from crafting a successful business strategy, the practical applications and use cases, the embedded investment journeys, technology play, I'm sure the audience would have found this session very informative. And once again, thanks for taking your time on a Sunday morning, Sunday evening to talk about the embedded finance journeys, right? So thanks to both of you, and thanks everyone for joining. I'd like to remind everyone that there's a closing note coming up, so please tune into that for the final session of the day. Thanks.